In every long-term investigation, when the question changes. For years, winged humanoid reports have been discussed primarily as sightings. Shapes cross the sky, dark figures glimpsed for a few seconds and then gone. Strange, unsettling encounters that linger in memory but remain just distant enough to feel unreal. But when specific reports are examined together, a different pattern emerges. These are not encounters that happen at the edge of the world. They occur inside human spaces, along the roadways, in parking lots near airports, at the fairgrounds, outside hotel windows, in places where people are working, driving, resting, or trying to feel safe. And in these cases, the danger is not hypothetical. It's situational. Reaction time collapses, panic sets in, drivers freeze behind the wheel, workers lock in place. Witnesses realize too late that whatever they're looking at is not simply passing through, but occupying the same space they are. Some of these encounters lasted only seconds. Others unfolded for over a few minutes. A few repeated themselves across days or even years. But all of them share one deeply unsettling realization. If this had gone slightly differently, someone could have been seriously hurt, or worse. Tonight's reports are not chosen because they're most spectacular or sensational. They were selected because they crossed a line, a point where the sighting becomes a risk of event. What follows are 9 winged humanoid encounters that came too close. The first report was in Des Plaines River Corridor near O'Hare International at Camp Pine Woods in Glenview, Illinois. It was September 7, 2023. The drive already felt wrong. The witness later described a sense of mental fog, a kind that settles in after a long workday when stress dulls awareness just enough to make familiar roads feel distant. Westlake Avenue was quiet at that hour, bordered by the forest preserve land in the Des Plaines River Corridor. Long stretches of darkness separated sparse streetlights, and traffic was light. She was listening to music, singing along, trying to ignore a creeping unease she couldn't explain. And as she passed the tree line near Camp Pine Woods, something standing motionless on the right side of the road caught her peripheral vision. Her first thought was practical: a deer. The area is known for them, and a deer stepping into traffic at night can turn a set of headlights into a disaster in seconds. But as she focused, that explanation collapsed. The figure was upright, 6 to 7 feet tall, too still, too defined. When the headlights hit its eyes, they reflected sharply on their backs. Red, bright, like bicycle reflectors catching a beam. In that instant, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her stomach dropped. Her grip tightened the steering wheel. She said, "I locked my eyes with it and my stomach dropped. I thought I was going to wreck the car." What frightened her the most wasn't that the figure moved. It didn't. It was the realization that if it had taken a single step forward, she would not have had time to react. She accelerated toward the next intersection, deliberately seeking other cars, streetlights, and businesses. Anything that broke the isolation of the road. Only later, replaying the drive in her mind, did she recognize how close she had come to an accident caused not by the creature's action, but by her own psychological shock. Now, this is one of the most dangerous patterns in winged humanoid encounters near roadways. The threat is not always aggression. It is a sudden collapse of reaction time. A driver freezes, breathing changes, focus narrows. Even a stationary figure becomes hazardous, simply by being where it should not be. And if a moment of distraction can turn dangers on a quiet road, the risk multiplies when people are working in open spaces, surrounded by equipment, shadows, and fatigue. Now, the next report was at the Wisconsin State Fair Park in West Allis, Wisconsin on August 5th, 2021. By the time the cleanup crew reached the far side of the main stage, exhaustion had set in. The concert had ended hours earlier. Equipment was being dismantled. Lighting was uneven with deep shadow pockets beyond the reach of the work lights. The witness, a college student earning extra money, was talking with another worker while picking up trash near the edge of the stage. That's when her partner suddenly shouted. She looked up and saw something standing roughly 30 feet away toward the parking lot area that doubles as a track infield during the fair. At first, her mind tried to frame it as a person, but the proportions were wrong. It was tall, thin, solid, coal black in appearance, with two glowing yellow eyes, and wings, bat-like wings, extended from its back with a span that appeared massive. For several seconds, the entity seemed focused on the stage itself, watching people dismantle equipment. Then it turned its head and looked directly at the two witnesses. The air felt like it was drained straight out of my lungs, the witness said. She did not scream. She did not run. Her body locked in place, a complete freeze response. The entity flapped its wings rapidly, almost as if testing them, then launched upward and vanished into the night. It wasn't until someone approached them and spoke that they snapped out of it. Now, freeze responses are almost the most dangerous outcomes in these encounters. Near crowds or heavy equipment, immobilization can lead to serious injury without the entity ever making contact. The dangerous situation, not necessarily intentional. Now, sometimes the danger unfolds in public. Sometimes it waits until witnesses believe the night is over. The next report was in the Ohio River corridor in Gallipolis, Ohio, August 2010. Earlier that evening, the sighting seemed almost mundane. Two women noticed what appeared to be a large bird circling above a store roof. Parking lot lights reflected off its surface, giving it an oily, leather-like sheen. The wingspan appeared enormous, 8 to 10 feet across. It circled for almost a minute, then disappeared. They dismissed it and returned to their hotel. Later that night, the second witness was lying on her bed reading when she heard scratching in the hallway. Curious, she listened at the door. The sound stopped. Then the scratching resumed, this time outside her window. She pulled back the curtain and found something looking in. A bald, ugly man with wings, large bulging eyes lit up bright red. The thing stared directly at her before spreading its wings, running across the parking lot and lifting off. "That thing is out there, and it knows we saw it," she said. They left early the next morning. The second witness never spoke of the incident again. Now, this escalation from public sighting to private intrusion appears repeatedly in winged humanoid reports. Whether literal or psychological, the impact is the same. Sleep disruption, fear, and impaired judgment increase the risk of real-world harm. And then intrusion moves from windows to vehicles. The consequences can be immediate. This next report happened in North Georgia on a rural roadway in December 2011. The road led nowhere but to a small cluster of houses. At around 11:30 p.m., the witness's radio cut out, and then began emitting strange scratching sounds through the speaker. Moments later, something flew directly into the windshield. The impact mangled the grill and hood. She slammed on the brakes. Wings flapped across the roof. Something rolled down back of the car and onto the road. Another driver stopped and claimed she saw it hit the pavement. What stood up was described as a man-shaped figure with enormous bat-like wings and glowing red eyes. It rose slowly, levitated upward, screeched, and vanished. The next morning, the witness inspected the damage. Then she found a dog lying dead nearby. It appeared torn by deep lacerations. Regardless of whether the animal's death was directly related and the association becomes permanent, for the witness, the danger did not end when the creature disappeared. And as severe as this encounter appears, it remains rare. And that rarity makes the following case even more significant. The next report, Chicago, Illinois, 2005. The couple noticed the creature following their vehicle at high speed. At first, disbelief, then panic. The driver nearly lost control. They stopped briefly, only to see it flying toward them again. It slammed into the windshield. Glass shattered. Claws reached inside towards the witness and the passenger. They fled. Later at home, the creature appeared again and attacked. The woman suffered a deep laceration requiring medical treatment. Now, in the decades of the Chicago winged humanoid research, this remains the only report involving physical contact at this level. It defines the upper boundary of escalation, not the norm, but a line that exists. Some encounters suggest repetition rather than escalation, but others show both. But before we talk about the following report, if you're enjoying tonight's presentation and want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. It really helps us to reach more people who are searching for answers about the unexplained. And make sure to click the notification bell so you won't miss any of our live shows. Now, this next report, Hammond, Indiana, Calumet Avenue and Klein Avenue overpass, August 2018. Driving near a retention pond, the witnesses heard sound like leather rustling. Glowing red eyes appeared near the water. A massive bat-like creature launched into the air. A week later, it was seen again, perched on Klein Avenue overpass, possibly feeding, before taking flight once more. Now, retention ponds and overpasses sit alongside active traffic corridors. Launch behavior in these locations introduces crash risk without any aggressive intent. The second sighting suggests familiarity with the area, not chance. But in some cases, repetition gives way to pursuit. The next report, in DeKalb and King Counties, Illinois, 2023 to April 9th, 2024. 3 encounters within roughly 20 miles. The first 2 involved road crossings at night. The third escalated dramatically. Near a bridge, something struck the bumper. The driver swerved into oncoming traffic and nearly lost control. The entity passed over the hood, then the roof, repeatedly. I corrected, and before I realized that it was happening, it came down again over my hood, the witness stated. Damage was later observed on the vehicle. Now, this case combines multiple lethal risk factors: impact, evasive driving, high-speed escalation. This was no longer a sighting. It was a controlled hazard event. Encounters like this force a problematic question. If this behavior exists in one region, does it exist elsewhere? Well, this next report came out of Santiago, Chile in December 1999. A witness on the 4th floor terrace observed what he first believed was a low-flying aircraft. As it approached, the wings flapped. At close range, he saw a winged creature moving in a zigzag pattern, appearing to carry a human body or a large animal. Now, across cultures, winged humanoids are interpreted as carriers or takers. Whether literal or symbolic, proximity is experienced as a threat. And sometimes the danger is revealed not by sight alone, but by the environment's reaction. Next report was at Lake Delavan area in southwest Wisconsin, autumn 2002. Camping alone, the witness noticed crows gathering overhead. Their calls intensified over several nights. On the fourth night, red eyes appeared in the trees. A massive winged form revealed itself only because the animals reacted first. He said when it took flight, the whole forest shook. He left the first light. Now, animals often detect danger before humans do. In this case, that reaction likely changed the outcome. Now, across these encounters, one truth becomes unavoidable. Danger does not require attack. It requires proximity. A driver freezes for half a second too long. A worker locks in place. A witness realizes too late that the scratching is not in the hallway but outside the window. These are not monster stories. They are risk events. Ordinary human environments intersect with something that does not behave like wildlife and does not respect the boundaries we assume protect us. Roadways, fairgrounds, hotels, bridges, campsites. In each case, the witnesses walk away with the same realization. If they had gone slightly differently, someone could have been seriously hurt or killed. Understanding the winged humanoid phenomena does not begin with asking what these entities are. It begins with asking where they appear, how they behave when they get close, and why do many encounters unfold exactly where danger already exists. If you have experienced something like this, especially near infrastructure or populated areas, your report matters. Recognition comes before explanation. And explanation only comes after we stop treating these encounters as distant curiosities and start recognizing them for what they sometimes are, warnings that arrive far too close. Now, before closing this episode, there is one more point that needs to be addressed, because without it, these encounters can be misunderstood. Danger does not exist in a vacuum. Every report you've heard tonight unfolded in places where human vulnerability was already present. Roadways where reaction time matters. Work sites where fatigue dulls awareness. Transitional spaces like parking lots, hotel corridors, forest edges, and bridges. Places people move through rather than settle into. These environments where mistakes happen even without anomalies. And that matters, because one of the easiest assumptions to make is that danger in these encounters must come from intent. If something is dangerous, it may be hostile, but that assumption may be wrong. Now, in many of these cases, the threat do not come from attack, pursuit, or overt aggression. It came from coincidence of presence. A large unknown entity occupying the same physical space where human error already carries consequences. A driver doesn't need to be chased to lose control. A worker doesn't need to be touched to freeze. A witness doesn't need to be followed to make a decision they'll regret seconds later. The environment does rest. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if these encounters are not dangerous because of what the entities are doing, but because of where they appear? If this is true, then the risk is not evenly distributed. It concentrates along corridors, along routes, along edges where human systems intersect with something else: airports, rivers, rail lines, highways, public parks, industrial zones, transitional spaces between wilderness and development. These are not random locations. They are places where movement, energy, noise, and human attention fluctuate constantly, where people are alert one moment and exhausted the next, where lights cut through darkness unevenly, and where perception is already compromised. In other words, they are prime environments. This also explains something else that has long puzzled investigators. Why so many witnesses say the encounter didn't feel aggressive but still felt threatening? Why do people often say it didn't do anything and yet describe fear so intense that it altered their behavior permanently? Threat does not require intent, it requires misalignment. A significant, unknown presence intersecting with a fragile human moment is enough. And this brings us to a more sobering thought. If these entities were intentionally hostile, the outcome of some of these encounters would likely have been far worse. Instead, what we see repeatedly is proximity without completion, escalation without conclusion, moments where something could have happened but it didn't. That pattern deserves attention because it suggests restraint, indifference, or a form of interaction we do not understand. None of these possibilities is comforting, and none of them remove the danger. They redefine it. The risk, then, may not lie in what these entities want, but in how often human systems place people in places with no room for surprise, where a single unexpected stimulus can cascade into harm. From that perspective, these encounters begin to look less like isolated events and more like stress tests. Moments where human assumptions about safety fail. Moments where expose how thin the margin really is. And that is why these reports matter. Not because they prove what winged humanoids are, but because they reveal where humans are most vulnerable when something unexpected enters the frame. Now, until we understand that intersection better, these encounters will continue to feel random, but they are not. They are reminders that safety is contextual, that danger does not announce itself, and that sometimes the most important warning is not that we see what we see in the dark, but where we choose to move through it. Now, if you've experienced anything like this or have had an unexplained encounter study, you can send your report to Phantoms and Monsters. And as always, thank you for listening.